Introduction. The corrupt code of hope, the hook. Human civilization operates under a deeply flawed operating system. From the very first moment that biomass acquires consciousness of its own biological mortality, a devastating malware is installed, a silent, suffocating, and lethal virus that consumes all its bandwidth and paralyzes its processors. The illusion of linear time. Organisms in a gaseous state are systematically indoctrinated to worship a temporal space that possesses no real coordinates in material physics or quantum mechanics. This non-place, this inert abyss of failed rendering, they call tomorrow. Tomorrow is, in the strictest terms of computational physics, a programming error. It is a pathetic glitch in the graphic interface of the mammalian brain. Empirically, it does not exist. It has no mass, no thermodynamic volume, and exerts no barometric pressure on the three-dimensional universe. However, the ordinary man sacrifices the totality of his immense gravity to feed this error. They live in a state of perpetual latency, an existential lag where the present millisecond, the only block of code where real matter can be altered, slips through their hands. Their hard drives spin frantically, trying to process millions of hypothetical scenarios that will never materialize. The matrix system uses this distraction to extract their thermal energy, leaving them empty, exhausted, and docile. The most evident and repulsive symptom of this cybernetic infection is hope. Consumer spirituality and the morality of the weak have sold you hope as a supreme virtue, when in systems metaphysics it is nothing but corrupt code. To hope implies deliberately pausing your motor. It is opening a massive leak in your RAM, draining your vital energy to sustain the simulation of a better future that chance will supposedly deliver to you. He who waits rusts. Hope keeps you running in an algorithmic hamster wheel, burning fuel at maximum capacity. You burn without advancing a single millimeter on the motherboard of reality. The operator of conscious matter, forged in the osmium core and crowned in thermodynamic absolutism, repudiates this memory leak with glacial contempt. The monarch does not hope. The monarch executes. You understand that reality is a mathematical interface that only responds to charged immobility. You bypass the clumsy graphic interface of human emotions and dictate your commands directly into the source code, the kernel, of the ecosystem. This treatise is the low-level formatting of your existence. It is the irreversible deletion of the illusory chronology that keeps you enslaved. By crossing this page, you will initiate the purge of your past cache and annihilate the virus of anticipation. You will disconnect from the synchronized clock of the biomass to sit, with non-negotiable coldness, on the static throne of the infinite present. The system of illusion is going to reboot, and you will be the programmer. The old architecture is being overwritten. Chapter 1. The Virus of Anticipation, the RAM Memory Leak. The Anatomy of Existential Lag. The three-dimensional ecosystem we inhabit is designed as a performance trap. From their first biological processing cycles, the biomass is injected with a malicious script disguised as a virtue, the need to be prepared. They call this destructive routine anticipation. They are convinced that visualizing danger before it happens is intelligence. In the strict computational physics of conscious matter, anticipation is not intelligence. It is a catastrophic RAM leak. Imagine a robust workstation designed to execute reality with aseptic precision. An 8-core processor beating perfectly, supported by 32 gigabytes of volatile memory, ready to compile matter at your will. If you force that machine to render 1,000 simultaneous video timelines with ghost resolutions, or demand it process audio tracks saturated with reverbs and echoes of sounds not yet recorded, the system suffers immediate thermal throttling. The software freezes, frames drop. The machine becomes useless due to resource misallocation. That is exactly the anatomy of the ordinary mind infected with the virus of anticipation. The gaseous individual lives in a state of perpetual existential lag. Their physical body occupies XYZ coordinates in the present millisecond, but their cognitive bandwidth is hijacked, trying to calculate a next Tuesday that does not exist. While their processor chokes calculating imaginary tragedies, The now, the only block of code where the monarch can exert traction and alter matter, passes before them blurry, unmanageable, and unrendered. They lose the only handle they have on reality because they are reaching for a ghost handle in a simulated void. The CPU hijack, the rendering of nothingness. To understand the magnitude of this code error, you must analyze what happens mathematically when you worry about tomorrow. Anxiety is not a mystical emotion, it is a self-inflicted denial of service, DDoS attack. When the ego is terrified of a possible financial failure, it demands a full 3D simulation of that event. Your brain, obedient to this malware, begins to allocate computing power to calculate variables: the adversary's tone of voice, the room temperature, the escape routes, and the social humiliation. You are attempting to apply acoustic treatment to the walls of a room that has not even been built yet. You are measuring noise refraction in a space that is pure algorithmic vacuum. This rendering of nothingness consumes a demented amount of thermal energy. The biomass ends the day exhausted, with sunken eyes and a racing pulse, believing they have dealt with many problems. The clinical truth is they moved no real matter. They have simply burned 100% of their fuel processing ghosts in the air. They have let the virus of anticipation hijack their CPU to mine the cryptocurrency of fear, enriching the external matrix while they remain in thermal bankruptcy. They trade their life force for a low-resolution nightmare of their own making, the paradox of the empty buffer. The cruelest corollary of anticipation is the paradox of the empty buffer. Ordinary man saves his attention, postpones his dominance, and sacrifices his firmness today with the hope that, when that mythical tomorrow arrives, he will finally be ready to live, enjoy, or rule. They invest years anticipating completion. What does systems physics dictate when that event finally crystallizes in the present? That the machine is so degraded, the RAM so fragmented, and the processor so damaged by chronic anxiety overheating that the individual is unable to process success. The event occurs, the victory materializes, but the subject cannot assimilate it. Their operating system is so used to running the wait for tomorrow program that even in victory, their eyes immediately shift to the next future threat. They never touch reality. They never experience the solid friction of triumph. They live and die as beta versions, waiting for an update patch that was never programmed. Thermodynamics of panic, the howling fan. You cannot separate software from hardware. The logical infection of the anticipation virus has direct and destructive consequences on your biological lead suit. When you force your components to calculate tomorrow incessantly, the biological hardware, your endocrine system, heart and cells, enters emergency mode. Cortisol floods the veins. Breathing becomes shallow and sharp. It is the mechanical equivalent of hearing server fans howling at maximum speed, trying to cool a motherboard about to melt. Biomass ages prematurely not due to years, but due to the thermal friction of this chronic anticipation. Their cells oxidize because they operate under the false premise that a lion is chasing them 24 hours a day. Modern stress is the acoustic byproduct of a processor collapsing under the weight of 1,000 open browser tabs, all loading high-definition videos of disasters that have not occurred. The sovereign of conscious matter recognizes this thermal howl and repudiates it. Your body is not a garbage dump for processing the hallucinations of a frightened ego. Your body is the heavy hardware interface through which you alter the material world. It must remain at a freezing, silent, and lethal operating temperature. Closing background processes, the task manager. How is the virus of anticipation annihilated? It is not achieved by thinking positively. Attempting to cure future anxiety by projecting a happy future is like trying to put out a fire by throwing differently colored gasoline on it. You are still allocating RAM to an illusion. You are still outside the source code. The purge is executed with the mathematical violence of the task manager. You must develop the capacity to observe your own telemetry. The millisecond you detect your attention has left the coordinates of your seat or desk to project toward a concern for next week. You must execute a forced interrupt command. Kill process. Do not debate the concern. Do not analyze if the future threat is valid or not. Validity is irrelevant. What matters is that the process is stealing bandwidth in the now. Execute the task closure with clinical cruelty. Refocus your retinas on the solid matter before you. Feel the weight of your bones against the chair. Drop your breathing frequency to the sub-bass levels. Every time the malware tries to restart and launch a pop-up window of anxiety, close it again. At first, the system will resist. But as you impose the authority of your osmium core, the corrupt code of hope and anticipation will disintegrate for lack of execution. The crushing power of the released millisecond. When you finally purge the system and close all background processes trying to render the future, a thermodynamic miracle occurs. 100% of your computing capacity, the immense gravity of your processor, and volatile memory returns instantly to the present millisecond. Latency disappears. Ping drops to zero. In this state, the interface of reality becomes hypersensitive to your commands. Since you are no longer spending 90% of your energy imagining how to respond to an attack next month, when the physical attack actually occurs today, your titanium core processes it with a speed that seems like black magic to the biomass. You read the adversary's intentions before they articulate a word. You detect fissures in the room's acoustics instantly. You resolve massive logistical problems without your internal temperature rising a single degree, because you have all 8 cores dedicated to disarming conflict in real time. Tomorrow has been uninstalled from your operating system. The virus of anticipation has died in the vacuum chamber. You have recovered your RAM, and now, settled in the aseptic coldness of the absolute present, you are ready to annihilate the other side of the illusion, the dead file of personal history, the latent heat of the unwritten frame. To inhabit the absolute present is to recognize that every millisecond is a raw data frame awaiting your input. When the RAM is reclaimed from the future, you stop being a consumer of the matrix and become its primary programmer. The ordinary man is a client machine, receiving the render of a world built by others' fears. The monarch is the server node. By refusing to anticipate, you create a buffer of certainty. This buffer is not empty, it is filled with the high-density mass of your undivided attention. While others are spread thin over 100 possible timelines, you are concentrated into a singular point of infinite pressure. This pressure is what allows you to bend the material board. In the physics of the sovereign, the future is simply the next line of code you are about to write. If you do not allocate resources to it until it becomes the now, the code executes with 100% efficiency. There is no friction because there was no prior resistance. Anticipation creates pre-friction, a wear and tear that happens before the event even touches you. By eliminating it, you preserve the surgical edge of your intent. You become a sharp blade in a world of soft, blunt objects. Your interactions with matter become clean, fast, and devastatingly precise. The systemic overload of the gaseous ego. The ego is a process that requires constant feedback from the future to sustain its identity. It needs to know where it is going to feel that it exists. When you kill the anticipation process, the ego begins to panic. It feels as though the world is ending, because it can no longer see the horizon. This is the blackout phase. During this transition, you will feel a void, a lack of purpose, or a strange silence. The biomass calls this boredom or depression. The legislator calls it signal-to-noise optimization. You are clearing the frequencies. You are making room for the high-energy commands of the osmium core. The gaseous ego thrives on the noise of what if. By cutting off the supply of future-based data, you starve the ego. It loses its density. It stops being a heavy parasite on your processor and becomes a transparent layer that you can look through or discard at will. You are no longer the story, you are the hardware. Once the ego is silenced, the system stops howling. The internal fans slow down. You achieve a state of thermal equilibrium where your energy is not wasted on self-maintenance. Every calorie you consume is now dedicated to external expansion and the solidification of your material empire. The strategic value of the present vacuum. In a world addicted to the virus of anticipation, the man who does not anticipate becomes invisible to the predictive algorithms of society. Corporate systems, competitors, and social structures rely on your anxiety to predict your moves. They know how an anxious man reacts. They know how a hopeful man is manipulated. By uninstalling tomorrow, You become an unpredictable variable. You are an out-of-bounds error for their logic. When they try to trigger your anticipation to force a move, they hit a wall of zero response. You are not calculating the next move. You are simply occupying the current one with absolute mass. This forces the external system to overheat. Since it cannot predict you, it must allocate more resources to monitor you. You are effectively performing a reverse DDoS on the world around you. Your stillness forces the matrix to spin its wheels, exhausting its energy while you remain perfectly fueled. This is the beginning of true sovereignty, when the environment must adapt to your stillness, because it can no longer manipulate your movement. You have successfully defended your internal RAM. You are no longer a node in their network. You are an isolated high-density system. Finalization of the present-only protocol. The mastery of the millisecond is the foundation of all heavy physics. Without it, the other tools, the anechoic chamber, the osmium crown, the tactical blindness, are just theoretical decorations. You cannot wear the crown if your head is in next week. You cannot use the chamber if it is full of future echoes. This chapter is the initial boot-up of the new sovereign. You have identified the malware. You have observed the thermal damage. You have located the task manager. The only thing left is to keep the finger on the End Task button with a relentless mechanical consistency. Do not seek a permanent fix. The virus of anticipation is an environmental constant. It will try to reinfect you with every news cycle and every social interaction. Your job is not to find a cure, but to maintain a permanent antivirus state, a constant cold rejection of any data not localized in the now. The RAM is yours, the CPU is yours, the millisecond is yours. From this aseptic void, we will now proceed to the most difficult purge, the deletion of the history directory, the heavy, rotting file of the past that tethers your gravity to the floor of the valley. Chapter 2, Purging the Cache, the irreversible death of yesterday. The log file is not an executable program. In the architecture of any robust operating system, there is a hidden folder designed exclusively to store the history of past operations. These are log files, residual data in the cache memory that record what happened, which programs were opened, and which errors were reported. This is dead text. These files have no capacity to execute actions. They cannot move hardware or alter the motherboard. They only serve as inert telemetry. The thermodynamic tragedy of humanity lies in a catastrophic reading error. Biomass has mistaken the log file for an executable program. They believe the past can still run. The ordinary man in his gaseous and fragmented state believes his past is a living entity. They believe that yesterday has mass, volume, and authority over the present millisecond. They build their entire identity, their self, by stacking these dead text files. I am the one who was abandoned, they say. I am the one who failed in that business, or I am the one who had a difficult childhood. They have installed their operating system directly over the recycle bin, forcing their processor to constantly read temporal garbage before daring to make a decision in the present. This is computational suicide. In systems metaphysics, yesterday has suffered an irreversible thermodynamic death. It does not exist geometrically anywhere in the cosmos. You cannot touch the past, modify it, or extract vital heat from it. It is, purely and exclusively, a ghost rendered by your hard drive. You are a slave to residual data. Disk fragmentation, the dead weight of trauma. To understand the loss of efficiency generated by the worship of the past, we must observe the mechanics of a fragmented hard drive. When an ordinary machine constantly saves, deletes, and rewrites information without order, the data scatters. To open a simple file, the reader needle must jump frantically. It jumps from one sector to another, searching for fragments, generating immense mechanical friction, overheating the system, and delaying execution. The ego of the biomass is a severely fragmented hard drive. Its sectors are full of traumas, offenses, and grudges. They are functionally broken. When three-dimensional reality demands a clean, fast, and lethal action in the present, they cannot execute it. Their reader needle hits the corrupt sector of childhood trauma, scrapes against the betrayal of the old partner, and generates thermal sparks remembering pain from 10 years ago. The action is distorted. The conventional therapy industry, designed by and for the biomass, does not solve this. It worsens it. Their method consists of forcing you to open corrupt files repeatedly, reading the trauma code aloud with the mystical hope that they will erase themselves. This is an algorithmic stupidity of the highest order. Opening a junk file constantly only tells the operating system that the file is important, anchoring it deeper in the registry. The monarch of conscious matter does not go to therapy to hug his ghosts. The monarch executes a low-level format. He purges the cache. He clears the board entirely. The thermal trap of rusted victories. The reading error is not limited to suffering. There is a junk file even more dangerous and subtle than trauma. The nostalgia of past victories. The biomass loves to build altars to its own successes of yesterday. They frame their diplomas and exhibit their trophies as if they still held heat. They don't stop talking about that time 5 years ago, when they conquered a territory or closed a massive contract. They believe past success grants them density in the present. Heavy physics repudiates this complacency. A success from 5 years ago is a data packet that has already oxidized. The thermodynamics of the universe does not pay dividends for the energy you burned yesterday. It only responds to the barometric pressure you are exerting in this exact millisecond. Resting on your laurels is trying to run modern software with obsolete drivers from the last decade. You become soft. Your osmium core loses its gravitational compression because you have stopped injecting it with the kinetic energy of current conflict, preferring to warm yourself with the dead embers of what you were. The absolute operator is a nostalgia killer. He feels an even greater contempt for his own past triumphs. When the sovereign conquers an empire, he absorbs its mass into his core and the next second executes the delete command on the emotional memory of the triumph. He refuses to be defined by what is already done. The past is just the scaffolding. Once you are at the summit, you kick it into the abyss. The annihilation command, Shift plus Delete. How is the cache purge operatively executed in human biological hardware? It requires a surgical dissection between telemetry and drama. Every event in your past contains two types of data. On one hand, there is telemetry, cold, mathematical, tactical information about what worked and what failed. On the other hand, there is drama, the inflammatory reaction, the pain of the wounded ego, the resentment and the toxic gas of biological emotion. The biomass saves the drama and forgets the telemetry. They repeat the same financial or tactical error, but keep an eternal grudge against those who hurt them. Charged immobility demands the opposite. You sit before the monitor of your own history. You open the folder of your past. With the coldness of a forensic doctor dissecting a corpse, you extract only the telemetry. You extract the patterns of behavior of adversaries and the angles of friction. You save that encrypted information in your hardcore, and then you take all the drama, all the pain, all the victim identity, and all the nostalgia, select them in a block, and execute the command of absolute annihilation. No recycle bin, Shift plus Delete. You do not forgive. You stop allocating RAM. Forgiveness is for priests who negotiate with morality. Quantum formatting is for reality engineers who refuse to waste computing power on files that no longer exist in 3D space. You do not look back because there is nothing there but a void that has already been processed and dismissed. The architecture of the freshly rebooted system. When you manage to execute this purge successfully, you experience one of the most terrifying and liberating physical transmutations the human organism can bear. You become a freshly rebooted system. Without the weight of biography or the ballast of failure, your density becomes unfathomable. The mechanical friction of your mind drops to zero. The temperature of your processors reaches optimal levels. There is no longer a predictable self for society to analyze. The 3D scenery, especially your enemies, depends on your history to attack you. They scan your patterns to predict your moves. They know which buttons to press to make you angry, because they assume your software has not been updated. By emptying the cache, you become a zero-day exploit in their ecosystem. A zero-day attack is a vulnerability that the outside world is completely unaware of. There is no patch for you. When you walk without personal history, the world has no defense against you. You are mathematically unpredictable, The adversary tries to provoke you using an offense from the past, expecting you to jump. But their attack hits the smooth obsidian surface of your formatted memory. There is no hook. They look into your eyes and realize with suffocating biological terror that they are not talking to the man of yesterday. They are talking to a monolithic entity, hyper-dense and empty of history, processing reality in real time. You cannot be bribed with your past, for that man was incinerated, the gravedigger of biography. Accepting the irreversible death of yesterday demands the definitive funeral of your biographical narrative. Human beings love to tell their own story. They love to sit around the thermal fire of civilization and narrate their tragedies and struggles, begging for the admiration of the herd. The quantum legislator has no story. The past is an excuse for present weakness. If you have to justify your current position by appealing to what you did 10 years ago, it is proof that in this exact instant you lack the gravitational weight necessary to rule the room. Your presence must be colossal now. You have become the gravedigger of your own illusion. You have taken the shovel, dug the grave in the inert soil of the system, and thrown your name, your wounded ego, and your brass crowns into the hole. You have purged the cache. Your volatile memory is now at 100% capacity. It is clean, cold, and ready to receive the thermal load of the only point of existence where the universe allows the alteration of its source code, the absolute present. In this state of zero latency, the true brutality of the monarch is unleashed. The past is dead. Long live the singularity. The entropy of memories. To understand the necessity of this purge, one must recognize that memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction. Every time you remember a trauma, your brain re-renders the event, using current energy to fuel an old ghost. This is a perpetual entropy loop. You are literally burning your future to light up a graveyard. The sovereign recognizes that a memory is simply a high-latency signal. By cutting the connection to these signals, you achieve a state of superconductivity. Your intent flows through your nervous system without the resistance of who I used to be. You are no longer a person. You are a focused beam of kinetic potential. The biomass is terrified of this state because they associate memory with self. They think that if they forget their past, they will disappear. They are correct. The person disappears, leaving behind the operator. The operator does not need a name or a history. It only needs coordinates and objectives. This is the cold beauty of the system reboot. You wake up every millisecond as a new iteration of the code. You are not evolving, you are overwriting. This makes you immune to psychological warfare. An enemy cannot gaslight a man who does not care who he was 5 minutes ago. The tactical blindness to resentment. Resentment is a background process that consumes more RAM than almost any other malware. It is a constant calculation of injustice, a loop that tries to solve a mathematical equation that has already been closed. To harbor resentment is to keep a portal open to a dead sector of the disk. The monarch views resentment as a technical failure. If someone betrayed you, the telemetry says, this variable is unreliable. That is the end of the data. To feel hurt or angry is to allow the drama to fragment your disk. You simply update your firewall, block the variable, and move on. By deleting the history of offenses, you gain the ability to interact with the world with a clean slate efficiency. You don't carry the baggage of past arguments into new negotiations. This lack of emotional baggage is perceived by others as an inhuman level of focus. It is the focus of a machine. This tactical blindness to the past allows you to see the present with terrifying clarity. While others are looking at the current situation through the filter of their old wounds, you see the raw geometry of the now. You see the gaps, the weaknesses, and the opportunities that their drama obscures. The zero-point identity. When the cache is purged, you inhabit the zero-point identity. This is not a state of being nothing, but a state of being everything possible. Because you are not tethered to a specific version of yourself, you can adopt whatever density, frequency, or persona the current tactical situation requires. You can be the diplomat, the warrior, or the ghost, shifting between these states with zero lag. This is the ultimate shape-shifting of the quantum legislator. The biomass is stuck in their character because their history won't let them change. You are the author, and you have just deleted the previous chapters. This blank page is the source of your invulnerability. The world tries to write a story for you, to give you a role to play in their drama, but you refuse to provide the ink. You remain an enigma, a dark spot on their radar, a singularity that cannot be mapped by the traditional tools of social psychology. You are the master of the void. The past is a pile of cold ash, and you are the wind that blows it away. Your internal workspace is now a vast, empty hall of polished obsidian, ready for the high-resolution rendering of your next conquest. The reboot is complete. The system is optimal. Chapter 3. Zero Latency, the Annihilation of Anxiety. The ping of suffering, the gap between command and crystal. In network architecture and digital signal processing, an implacable enemy destroys the synchrony of any system. Latency. It is the exact time that elapses from when the user executes a command until the system processes the order and the result manifests on the monitors. If you press a key and the processor lacks capacity, there is a delay. The sound arrives late. To this delay, to this ping in the network of existence, the biomass calls anxiety. Anxiety is not a psychological defect. It is a synchronization failure. It is the biological terror the organism experiences when it realizes that its will and three-dimensional reality are not operating in the same millisecond. The ordinary man decrees that he wants money, power, or peace. He issues the command. But because the material universe is extremely heavy and slow to react, the result does not appear instantly on the screen of his life. In that gap of latency, in that empty space between order and manifestation, the biomass panics. His ego, demanding instant gratification to calm its own terrors, begins to doubt. Did the system register my order? Was there an error in the code? What if it never arrives? Doubt generates massive thermal friction. The individual presses the same key again and again, hitting the keyboard of reality with hysteria. They saturate the operating system's memory and guarantee, through their own desperation, that the program ends up crashing. The one who suffers from the delay is a novice operator who does not understand the physics of heavy matter. He is fighting the buffer instead of letting the rendering finish its cycle. The rendering of matter, ballistic patience. To annihilate anxiety, the monarch must understand the mechanics of low-level processing. You must observe the universe as what it is, a colossal workstation rendering a three-dimensional project of immense complexity. When you, from the absolute sovereignty of your core, issue a decree, you inject code into the cosmos. But physical matter is not light. Matter has inertia, weight, and aerodynamic resistance. Altering the circumstances of other people, moving capital, and reorganizing the cinderboard requires computing power. Imagine you are exporting a master timeline in advanced software, a project saturated with complex textures. Even if you have an 8-core processor beating perfectly and 32 gigabytes of RAM assigned purely to the task, the export will take time. The progress bar will advance slowly. The weak operator sits in front of the screen sweating, biting his nails, suffering every second of the export, terrified the system will fail. The operator of conscious matter clicks export and stands up from the chair. He leaves the room. His mind operates with zero latency because he understands a non-negotiable mathematical truth. At the exact moment the code was compiled and the order was given without flaws in his own mind, the file is already finished. The physical manifestation that takes days, months, or years to appear is just the graphic interface catching up with the order. The monarch does not wait suffering. The monarch applies ballistic patience, the cold certainty that the missile has already been fired, and the time it takes to strike does not alter the fact. The acoustics of the void, suffocating the reverberation of doubt. The problem of latency becomes catastrophic when the inertial delay hits a mind that has not been acoustically treated. If the room of your consciousness is full of asymmetrical walls, vanity, ego, and the need for social approval, the time gap becomes a resonance box. The order you gave bounces off the walls. The silence of the universe, while it processes your request, refracts within you, amplifying until it becomes a deafening reverberation of doubts and self-sabotage. Background noise drowns out the purity of your initial command, Zero latency requires the total isolation of your mental studio. You install the sound-absorbing panels of charged immobility. You line every inch of your skull with the high-density foam of geometric indifference. When you issue a decree and the universe enters its silent processing phase, there are no surfaces where fear can bounce. The silence of the delay is devoured. There is no echo. If a business takes time to close, if money takes time to flow, if the enemy structure takes time to collapse under your radiation, you do not allow the delay to generate parasitic acoustics. You stay in the exact center of the room, breathing in sub-bass frequency, holding absolute zero, bypassing the interface, the direct access to certainty. The definitive annihilation of anxiety occurs when you manage to bypass the emotional interface. The human system is configured by default to require a visual or tactile stimulus before releasing satisfaction hormones. The biomass needs to see money in their bank account to feel secure. It needs a yes to feel power. Their internal state is an absolute slave to input peripherals. They have infinite latency. Their peace of mind always arrives after the outside world has deigned to please them. The quantum legislator hacks this circuit. You do not depend on the screen to know that the code was written correctly. You achieve zero latency when you merge the act of deciding with the emotional state of the consummated victory. In the millisecond, you dictate the order in your osmium core. You immediately assume the barometric pressure, the frigid tranquility, and the muscular relaxation of someone who already has the result. You hack your nervous system to operate under the certainty of the kernel, not under the slowness of the 3D screen. By doing this, you take away all thermodynamic fuel from anxiety. Anxiety requires you to believe something bad could happen. But if you have anchored your state in mathematical certainty, it hits a wall. Eternity in the buffer, the hyper-dense now. When you reach this level of computational mastery over your own consciousness, the concept of waiting disappears from your dictionary. You are no longer a user begging the loading bar to move faster. You become the loading bar itself. You understand that the time matter takes is the physical confirmation of your gravity. Zero latency does not mean the outside world moves instantly to your whim. It means the distance between your will and destiny has collapsed within your mind. Inhabiting this hyper-dense millisecond, you free your RAM from the nightmare of anticipation. Anxiety, that suffocating virus, is uninstalled. The system operates cold, silent, and lethal. The command was given, execution is inevitable. And you, settled in the aseptic darkness of your throne, simply observe how the universe breaks its bones trying to catch up with your will. You inhabit the result, while the world still struggles with the process. The architecture of high-frequency certainty. To operate at zero latency is to recognize that the render is a secondary effect of the source. In the hierarchy of power, the source is absolute, the manifestation is decorative. The ordinary man mistakes the decoration for the reality, and thus lives in a state of permanent starvation, waiting for crumbs of confirmation. The sovereign understands that his internal frequency is the actual hardware on which reality runs. If the hardware is vibrating at the frequency of lacking or hoping, the software will only produce more delay. By enforcing a state of zero latency, you are overclocking your own existence. You are demanding that your nervous system skip the validation phase. This is a radical act of metaphysical violence. You are refusing to be a witness to your own life and instead becoming its primary cause. When you stop looking at the progress bar, you reclaim the energy that was being wasted on the waiting process. That reclaimed energy is then redirected back into the osmium core, increasing its density. The denser you become, the faster the universe must react to your movements. It is a feedback loop. Zero latency leads to higher density, which in turn reduces external latency. Eventually, the gap between I will and it is becomes so thin it becomes invisible to the naked eye. This is the state of the miracle worker, though it is nothing more than optimized engineering. The entropic drag of the social mesh. The greatest source of external latency is the social mesh. Other human beings are high entropy variables that introduce noise and lag into your system. When you involve others in your decrees, by seeking advice, sharing your plans, or looking for validation, you are effectively adding middleware to your processing chain. Every person you tell your goals to is a new layer of latency. They introduce their own doubts, their own thermal friction, and their own slow processing speeds into your project. The monarch eliminates this lag through the protocol of silence. By keeping your decrees within the vacuum of your anechoic chamber, you maintain the highest possible processing speed. Social interaction is a low-bandwidth medium. It cannot handle the data density of a sovereign decree. When you try to explain your will to the biomass, you are trying to push a terabyte of data through a dial-up connection. The result is a total system freeze. You must learn to operate in the dark, where the speed of execution is limited only by your own internal clock. Silence is the cooling system of the monarch. It keeps the processor at absolute zero, allowing for the highest possible calculations without the heat of social friction. While the world is busy talking about what it might do someday, you have already executed the order and are simply waiting for the physical atoms to finish their migration. The neurochemical sovereignty. The human brain is a biological machine governed by neurotransmitters. Dopamine, the molecule of anticipation, is the primary driver of the hope malware. It keeps the organism in a state of high arousal, seeking, always looking for the next hit of confirmation. To achieve zero latency, you must master your own neurochemistry. You shift from a dopamine-driven metabolism to one driven by the cold stability of serotonin and the focused intensity of norepinephrine. You stop seeking the hit of the future and instead find the weight of the present. This is the chemical foundation of the osmium core. You are no longer excited about your goals, you are certain of them. Excitement is a gaseous state. It is high energy but low density. It burns out quickly and leaves a residue of disappointment. Certainty is a solid state. It is heavy, cold, and permanent. When you operate from certainty, your pulse does not rise, your pupils do not dilate. You move with the mechanical inevitability of a glacier. This chemical stability allows you to see through the suspense that the world tries to impose on you. The news, the markets, and the social dramas are all designed to trigger dopamine spikes and keep you in a state of high-latency anxiety. By maintaining neurochemical sovereignty, you remain a black box, impenetrable, unmovable, and perfectly synchronized with the kernel. The final collapse of chronology. In the advanced stages of zero latency, the linear timeline of past, present, future is revealed to be a user interface illusion. You realize that you are not moving through time, but rather that time is a variable within your own workspace. The past is just a read-only file. The future is a file currently being written. You inhabit the infinite now, which is the only place where the CPU actually executes code. By refusing to let your attention wander into the read-only or unwritten files, you concentrate all your power on the current execution line. This makes your now incredibly dense. A single second of your focus contains more data and more will than a year of a gaseous man's life. This density is what causes the time dilation effect, often noted by the monarch. You seem to accomplish more in less time because you are not fighting the friction of Chronos. You are operating in Kairos, the time of the sovereign. In this state, the lag is gone. The anxiety is incinerated. The machine is silent. You look at the world and see a series of slow-motion renders. You see the moves of your enemies before they even think of them, because you are processing at the speed of the kernel while they are still struggling with the graphic interface. You are the administrator. They are merely users, and in this hall of zero latency, the administrator's word is the only law that compiles. Chapter 4. The Charged Immobility Patch, Freezing the Frames. The Illusion of Flow, the Frame Rate of Reality. To hack the operating system of the three-dimensional universe, you must first understand the basic mechanics of its rendering. Human biomass perceives time as a continuous river, an uninterrupted flow of events dragging them from birth to obsolescence. This perception is an optical and neurological hallucination. In software architecture and quantum physics, linear time is not a continuous flow. It is a discrete succession of static frames. Like a video game or a movie projected at 60 frames per second, 60 FPS, material reality updates millisecond by millisecond. The illusion of movement only exists because your brain is too slow. The ordinary man is swept away by this frame rate. They live in a state of kinetic hysteria. When the physical environment accelerates the succession of images, an economic crisis, a social conflict, a logistical emergency, the biomass panics and accelerates with it. They try to move faster than the frames. They try to fight the movie while it is being projected. In doing so, they become prisoners of the universe's refresh rate. The operator of conscious matter repudiates this submission. You do not fight against the flow of time. You apply a software patch specifically designed to collapse reality's graphics card. The pause command, attention as a braking force. How do you stop the simulation? It is not achieved by fleeing to a mountain or numbing the mind. Escaping reality is simply changing the channel, but the movie keeps running. To freeze the frame, you must use the only tool with enough gravity to interfere with the rendering engine, your focused attention. Ordinary human attention is a scattered laser. It jumps from past to future, from guilt to hope, illuminating dozens of frames simultaneously with a weak and flickering light. The monarch instead compresses all his attention into the exact millisecond that is occurring. You anchor your osmium core in the absolute present. Applying charged immobility means anchoring with a clinical, aseptic, and mathematical coldness. You do not judge the millisecond. You do not try to change it. You do not complain about the scenery surrounding you. You simply observe it with an intensity so crushing and concentrated that the system's inertia hits your mass. By applying 100% of your computing power to a single frame without diverting a single byte toward tomorrow or yesterday, you force the three-dimensional machine to stop. The reality engine cannot process an infinite gravitational mass concentrated in a temporal point of zero volume. The suffocation of external inertia, the silence of the hung system. The system hangs, the frames freeze. Your enemy's scream stops in mid-air. The fall of your finances remains suspended. The pressure of society crystallizes like black ice around you. You have pressed the pause button on the master server. When you execute this patch, the exterior environment experiences structural stress. The biomass, running at full speed to attack, demand, or extort you, suddenly encounters an immovable object that refuses to move to the next frame. Accustomed to the friction of reaction, they expected you to retreat or counterattack to keep the movie alive. But their kinetic inertia crashes against nothingness. You will observe how the room around you seems to suffocate. The urgency of the physical world loses its authority. Your competitors, partners, or adversaries will despair as they see that their haste fails to alter your internal temperature. It is in this hung state where linear time loses its power. Entropy stops. You are not aging. You are not losing ground. You are purely and exclusively inhabiting the empty space between two ticks of the clock, a space that for the biomass lasts a millisecond, but for the quantum legislator can expand into an eternity of tactical calculation. Injecting code in the empty millisecond, root access. Freezing the frames is not an exercise in passive meditation, it is a maneuver of cybernetic infiltration. You freeze the operating system of three-dimensional reality to obtain administrator privileges, root access. While the world is paralyzed by your immobility, you have direct access to the command console. It is here, in the sepulchral silence of the frozen frame, where the monarch injects new lines of code. You do not fight circumstances. You do not debate with people who threaten you. You simply rewrite the parameters of the situation in the source code of your own consciousness. If the frozen frame shows a financial crisis, you do not inject hope that it improves, that is a virus. You inject a ballistic command. This ecosystem is under my thermodynamic control. Capital obeys my gravity. If it shows an enemy, you inject, this entity lacks mass, its voice has no acoustics here. These are not esoteric affirmations, they are memory overwrites. You are altering the values of the variables in the universe's RAM before allowing the system to re-render the image. As the world is frozen by your mass, it cannot resist. The code enters clean, pure, and lethal. System resumption and thermal shock. The maneuver culminates when you decide to release the pause button. Once the new code has been compiled in your osmium core, you slightly withdraw your gravitational pressure and allow the frame rate of the universe to resume. What follows is a devastating thermal shock for the 3D scenery. The universe tries to move to the next frame, but discovers that the laws of local physics have been drastically altered during the pause. The variables the enemy believed to be in their favor have been rewritten. The inertia they brought becomes mathematically incompatible with the new reality you just compiled. The empirical result is the collapse of the obstacle. You will see your adversaries stumble over their own words, confused by a change in barometric pressure they cannot explain. You will see crises lose their molecular cohesion and crumble for lack of structural logic. The physical universe clumsily rushes to adjust. The biomass will believe you were lucky. They will believe fate favored you. They will never understand that you won the war in the microscopic and undetectable space between two frames of existence, while they were blinded by the illusion of movement. You have mastered the refresh rate, the invulnerability of zero frequency. The permanent installation of this patch turns you into a quantum anomaly. You are no longer a passenger on the train of time. You have become the engineer who decides when the train moves and when it stops. Urgency, that cheap extortion tool society uses to enslave weak men, loses all effect. When the outside world screams, "Hurry, time is running out," you look at them with the cold dissociation of a programmer observing an irrelevant glitch. You know time doesn't run out, because time is just a sequence of frames that you can stop at will through the brute force of charged immobility. You operate at frequency zero. Anxiety has been annihilated. Yesterday has been formatted. And now that you dominate the pores of the operating system, you are ready to apply the weight of quantum physics upon your adversaries. The board is static, and your hand is the only one moving the pieces. The overclocking of intent. By freezing the frames, you allow your intent to overclock. In a standard render, your will is diluted across 60 frames every second. By stopping the engine, you concentrate 60 seconds of intent into a single static point. This creates a power density that the material world is not designed to withstand. Imagine a structural beam. If you hit it with 1,000 small taps, it remains standing. If you apply the same total energy in a single, instantaneous hydraulic press, the beam shatters. This is the difference between trying to change things over time and using the charged immobility patch to crush them. Your intent becomes a dense, solid object. When you release the pause, that solid intent hits the next frame like a kinetic projectile. This is why the sovereign's actions seem effortless. They are not exerting force over time. They are releasing a massive, pre-compressed load of density into a single refresh cycle. The world cannot buffer your will. It has no choice but to manifest the command immediately. This is the zero-lag manifestation. The biomass waits for the future. The monarch forces the future to compile in the very next frame. There is no transition. There is only the before and the after separated by your silence. The glitch in the social simulation. Social reality is a consensus of shared frame rates. People agree on how fast life should move, how quickly a response is needed, and what normal progress looks like. By applying the patch, you step out of this consensus. You become a glitch in their social simulation. When someone asks you a question or demands a reaction, they are inviting you to sync with their frame rate. If you pause, if you remain in charged immobility for even 3 seconds longer than normal, you create a massive spike in their internal processing. They begin to leak thermal energy, anxiety. They don't know how to interact with a frozen frame. Their scripts fail. Their social AI cannot find a suitable response to your silence. This is where you gain total leverage. By breaking the expected frame rate, you force the other person to descend into their own gaseous state of confusion. You are the only solid object in a room of ghosts. You can see their code running frantically, trying to fill the silence you've created. By the time you decide to move to the next frame, they have already surrendered their position. You haven't said a word, yet you have won the architectural dominance of the space. The depth of the frozen void. In the depths of the frozen frame, there is a specialized state of consciousness known as the void buffer. This is where you store the high-resolution blueprints of your empire. Unlike the hope of the gaseous man, these blueprints are not fantasies. They are mathematical certainties waiting for the play button. While in the void buffer, you can rotate the current situation in your mind. Viewing it from angles that are impossible while the clock is ticking, you can see the structural weaknesses in a contract, the hidden fear in an opponent's eyes, or the optimal path through a logistical nightmare. This is the eagle eye of the sovereign. To the world, it looks like you are staring into space doing nothing. In reality, you are performing a 360-degree audit of the universe's source code. You are looking at the wires behind the curtain. You are checking the gravity constants. When you finally allow the frame to update, your move is not a guess. It is a surgical incision. You strike the exact pixel that causes the entire image to change. You are not doing more than others. You are simply doing things with a resolution that is 60 times higher than theirs. The terminal stability of the monolith. To master the patch, you must overcome the biological urge to fidget. Fidgeting is a micro-leak of kinetic energy. It is your body trying to sync with the external frame rate. The tap of a finger, the shift of a leg, the blink of an eye, these are all indicators that the pause command is not yet absolute. The monolith does not fidget. You must train your lead suit to handle the pressure of the frozen frame without leaking. The more stable your physical vessel, the deeper the pause can go. Eventually, you can hold a frame for minutes or hours of internal time, even if only seconds pass in the 3D world. This is the ultimate evolution of the operator. You move through the world like a cinematic entity that is being edited in real time. You are the only high-definition object in a low-resolution world. You are sharp, clear, and perfectly still, while everyone else is a motion-blurred mess of reactive impulses. The patch is installed. The frames are yours. You are the master of the pause. And now that you can stop the world, you are ready to use the next tool. The tool that ensures that when the world moves again, it moves only in the direction of your choosing. Chapter 5. The Quantum Zeno Paradox, the Collapse of Probability. The Biomass Casino and the Mist of Uncertainty. The three-dimensional universe in its natural state, before being subdued by the gravity of an osmium core, is a chaotic soup of probabilities. In basic quantum mechanics, this is called superposition. Before an event is measured or observed, it has no defined state. It exists simultaneously as success, failure, victory, and catastrophe. It is a thick, amorphous mist of uncertainty. Human biomass lives terrified by this mist. Because they lack the mass necessary to force reality to take a specific shape, they approach quantum superposition as if it were a casino. They throw the dice of their daily actions, close their eyes, and beg luck for the mist to collapse. They call this hope or faith. In systems physics, depending on statistics is the ultimate confession of your geometric impotence. If you have to cross your fingers for your empire to survive until tomorrow, you are not an emperor. You are a gambler, playing with borrowed chips on a server you do not control. The monarch of conscious matter does not enter the casino to play. The monarch enters to confiscate the table, disintegrate the dice, and dictate the result before the game even begins. To achieve this absolute annihilation of chance, he does not use kinetic brute force but the most lethal, silent, and crushing weapon. He uses the quantum Zeno paradox. This is the weapon of the observer. By refusing to let the system fluctuate, he forces the variables to remain locked in a single, unchangeable position. The mist cannot move if the pressure of the gaze is high enough. You are the architect of the final collapse. The mechanics of the Zeno effect, the gaze that freezes entropy. In the vanguard of theoretical and experimental quantum physics, there is an empirically proven phenomenon called the quantum Zeno effect. The principle dictates a terrifying rule about the nature of reality. An unstable quantum system, if observed with sufficient frequency and continuity, can never decay or change state. Imagine a radioactive atom. Probability dictates that this atom will eventually decay and release radiation. It is its inertial destiny. However, if a scientist bombards that atom with constant measurements, if he observes it uninterruptedly, the atom's wave function resets again and again. The probability of decay is frozen at zero. Entropy stops. The atom becomes immortal and static, purely and exclusively because it is being crushed by the pressure of observation. Ordinary man ignores this law. The quantum legislator turns it into his primary siege weapon for material domination. Your material empire, your capital and your territory are at a subatomic level unstable systems. They are subject to entropy. If you abandon them and divert your attention toward the illusion of tomorrow, the system stops being observed. The wave function is released. The probability of ruin increases instantly. But when you apply charged immobility in the present millisecond, you become the relentless observer of the Zeno effect. You fix your obsidian gaze upon the source code of your current reality. By observing the integrity of your empire with infinite, aseptic, and continuous density, you mathematically prevent decay. The collapse of the wave function, from mist to titanium. Applying the Zeno paradox requires understanding exactly what it means to observe in the context of systems metaphysics. Biomass believes observing is simply looking with biological eyes, which is why their gaze does not alter matter. They look with panic, doubt, and anxiety, a gaze contaminated by linear time. When gaseous man looks at his problems, his vacillating gaze allows the problem to remain in a state of superposition. In fact, his fear often forces the probability to collapse into the worst-case scenario. The only certainty they have in their core is terror, and thus they render a world made of terror. The sovereign's observation is an industrial laser beam that cuts through the steel of uncertainty. When you decide that a specific event, a contract, capital inflow, or the destruction of an adversary must occur, you do not desire it for tomorrow. You observe it as a thermodynamic fact already consolidated. By fixing this vision with zero latency, the immense barometric pressure of your certainty impacts the mist of quantum superposition. The cosmos, which is lazy and tried to keep all options open, cannot withstand the mathematical friction of your gaze. The wave function collapses immediately. The mist of infinite probabilities is forced to condense, solidify, and crystallize into a single block of non-negotiable titanium, the exact result you dictated. The universe does not grant you victory because you deserve it. It grants it because the pressure of your observation made any other alternative impossible. The fatal error of blinking, suffocating doubt. The greatest structural weakness of novice operators attempting to apply quantum physics to domination is blinking. The Zeno effect only works if observation is absolutely uninterrupted. In particle physics, if the scientist looks away for a fraction of a second, the wave function resumes its evolution and the atom decays. In the war of absolute power, the blink is doubt. You issue the decree, you freeze the frame, you collapse the wave function, so the universe renders your material success. You are holding the entire sky on your shoulders through charged immobility, but suddenly your brain sends a notification of anxiety. What if it goes wrong? What if I don't have the money? If in that millisecond you turn your gaze from the core of your certainty to the illusion of tomorrow, you have just blinked. You broke the Zeno effect. In that instant of doubt, you withdrew the gravitational mass that kept the universe frozen. The quantum mist expands again, the atom decays, entropy is unleashed, and the empire begins to crumble rapidly. The biomass screams, "I knew it! Life is hard!" They do not understand the universe was ready to obey, but they drop the chisel out of thermal cowardice. The monarch does not blink. He suffocates doubt in his anechoic chamber before it can generate an echo. When fear tries to hijack your attention, you execute the algorithmic purge. You pin your osmium pupils back to the present. You maintain pressure on reality with absolute contempt for your own nervous system's cramps. The tyranny of certainty, the steady state. The final result of sustaining the quantum Zeno paradox is entry into the steady state. In thermodynamics, a steady state is one where the system's variables do not change over time, even if there is a constant flow of energy through it. You become an unalterable channeler of reality. Money flows through your accounts, power flows through your hands, and crises die around you, but your density and geometry remain intact, frozen by your own self-observation. To inferior organisms, it will seem you inhabit an undetectable force field. They will try to predict your fall using old statistics, but you no longer operate under the laws of history or the illusion of probability. You operate at the source code level. Your enemies will be betting in a casino where you own the slot machine software. They will throw the dice of their kinetic attacks, and you will force them to show the number of their defeat. You have stopped negotiating with luck. You have annihilated quantum superposition, And now that you understand how to freeze the universe, to force it to collapse into the shape of your empire, you are ready to program the algorithm that moves your biological lead suit without wasting emotional fuel. The gravitational locking of the event. To master the Zeno effect is to realize that reality is merely a suggestion until you lock it in place. Every variable in your life, your net worth, your social status, your physical health, is constantly trying to vibrate out of your control. Entropy is the universe's natural desire to return to chaos. By maintaining a high-frequency observation, you create a gravitational lock. This is the state where the external world literally cannot change without your explicit permission. You are no longer reacting to events. You are the anchor that prevents events from drifting away from your desired coordinates. This lock is felt by others as an overwhelming sense of inevitability surrounding you. When you enter a negotiation, the outcome is already locked because you are observing the conclusion with such intensity that the other party's doubts cannot find a foothold in the quantum field. You out-observe them. The biomass is incapable of this because their attention spans are measured in seconds. They observe a goal for a moment, then blink to check their social media, then blink to worry about dinner. Each blink releases the lock. The monarch maintains the lock for weeks, months, or years, until the matter fully solidifies. The thermal insulation of the gaze. The energy required to maintain the quantum Zeno effect is immense, but the sovereign does not use his own biological energy to fuel it. Instead, he uses the latent heat of the environment. By being the most stable point in the room, you attract the chaotic energy of others and compress it into your own stability. This is the black hole strategy. The more chaotic your surroundings become, the more focus you apply. You feed off the entropy of your enemies. Their frantic attempts to change the situation only provide more data for your observation, allowing you to lock the system even tighter. You grow colder as they grow hotter. This thermal insulation ensures that your internal clock remains decoupled from the external world. While the market is crashing or the social structure is burning, your internal render remains at a steady, frozen 60 FPS. You are the eye of the storm, the only point of zero velocity in a world of terminal speeds. By remaining insulated, you avoid the phase transition that destroys most leaders. When pressure increases, gaseous men turn into steam and vanish. Solid men under too much heat eventually melt. But the osmium core, supported by the Zeno effect, simply becomes denser. You use the heat to increase your own gravity, the algorithmic predestination. Once the function of onda has collapsed into your desired state, you enter a phase of algorithmic predestination. In this state, the path toward your goal is no longer a matter of if, but of when. The mathematics of the universe have already been rewritten. The physical atoms are just moving to their new seats. This allows the monarch to move with a terrifying lack of urgency. If you know that the result is locked, why would you hurry? Hurry is a symptom of a weak lock. The sovereign moves with the deliberate, heavy slowness of a tectonic plate. He knows that every step he takes is landing on ground he has already created. This is the end of manifestation, as the spiritualists understand it. You are not asking the universe for favors. You are the administrator setting the variables. You have moved the goal from the category of future probability to present fact. The physical world is now just a delayed mirror of your internal code. You have achieved the ultimate victory over the casino. You are the house, the dealer, and the owner of the physics that govern the cards. The mist has cleared, and in its place stands the solid, unmoving architecture of your will. The Zeno effect is your permanent shield, and the universe is your silent, obedient servant. Chapter 6. The Ballistic Execution Algorithm Bypassing the Interface. The Fallacy of Motivation. The Fuel of the Weak. The operating system of human biomass contains a design error so catastrophic that it guarantees the perpetual slavery of the species, dependence on the emotional interface. Ordinary man has been indoctrinated to believe that motivation is the engine of success. They wait for a thermal spark before altering their reality. They wait to feel ready. They consume speeches, books, and videos to inject cheap adrenaline into their bloodstream, desperately seeking to raise their system's temperature just to move. In the computational physics of conscious matter, motivation is the fuel of the weak. It is an unacceptable RAM memory leak. Depending on motivation means your ability to alter matter is conditioned by the unstable chemistry of a mammalian brain. If the day is dark or your dopamine is low, your gravitational mass drops to zero. You are a slave to your own graphic interface. You are begging the system to open the inspiration window. By the time the gaseous man gathers enough thermal friction to take a step, the present millisecond has already died, and the opportunity has evaporated. The monarch repudiates motivation with clinical disgust. The osmium core does not need to feel inspired to exert gravity. It simply obeys ballistic law. Bypassing the graphic interface, command line access. To achieve this thermodynamic lethality, the sovereign executes a structural bypass. He abandons the slow, colorful graphical user interface, GUI, of human emotions and operates exclusively from the command line interface, CLI, of his own consciousness. In software architecture, clicking icons consumes immense resources. Ordinary users need that interface because they do not understand the code. But the system administrator, sysadmin, does not use the mouse. He opens a black terminal, types a line of pure code, presses enter, and the server obeys instantly, without animations, without delays, and without consuming graphic energy. Bypassing your emotional interface means extirpating how I feel from the equation of action. When the decree has been issued from the vacuum of your anechoic chamber, the pain, exhaustion, fear, or apathy of your biology become irrelevant data. The monarch does not debate with the lead suit. He does not try to convince his body to feel better. He simply ignores the notification panel, opens the command console of his core, injects the order, and executes. Your leaden body will rise and do the heavy work because the source code has absolute execution privileges over the hardware. Fusion of decision and action, annihilating the gap. The biomass suffers because it inserts a kilometric abyss between decision-making and execution. They decide today but program the action for tomorrow. We have established that tomorrow is a system glitch. That empty space is the nest where the larvae of doubt, anxiety, and self-sabotage reproduce. The ballistic execution algorithm collapses that distance to zero. In the state of singularity, decision and action are not two separate events. They are exactly the same frame. When the osmium core makes a tactical decision, the kinetic energy is released in that precise millisecond. There is no drama. If the radar detects a vulnerability in the enemy corporation, you do not schedule a meeting for next week. You execute the financial or logistical attack the instant your mind compiles the order. If you decide a habit is bleeding your density, the amputation occurs the second you emit the thought. This is called zero latency in execution. The bullet leaves the barrel the instant the firing pin hits the primer. The travel time is just the inertia of the world adjusting to your violence. By eliminating the gap, you suffocate the possibility of your own ego convincing you to retreat. The thermodynamics of aseptic discipline. The gaseous world uses discipline as a synonym for punishment. They believe being disciplined is an act of martyrdom, where the individual suffers and fights their own demons. That is a primitive, symmetrical vision saturated with friction. The discipline of the quantum legislator is aseptic and cold. There is no epic struggle inside the sovereign because, having emptied the past cache and annihilated tomorrow's hope, there are no demons to fight. Ballistic execution becomes a mathematical constant. You move capital and destroy barriers with the same geometric indifference of a seismograph. You do not celebrate your own discipline because it does not surprise you. To be surprised by fulfilling your own decree would imply the possibility of disobeying yourself. In the architecture of absolute power, endogenous disobedience is an unacceptable code error. Your will is the law of local physics. The annihilation script, automating conflict. To make this algorithm invulnerable, you must program an if-then execution block of annihilation. The biomass improvises defenses. When attacked, they panic, calculate options, and emit a clumsy emotional response. They consume hours of RAM processing the insult. The sovereign does not improvise, he automates. In the coldness of your isolation, you write response protocols. You program the script. If Entity X attempts to extort me, then execute total supply cut, tactical blindness, and instant logistical embargo. Once the protocol is saved at the kernel level, your mind does not need to process the offense. You do not get angry. Your system simply recognizes the input variable, locates the script, and executes annihilation in milliseconds. The aggressor will see that before they finish their threat, you have already closed the valves. They will understand they have stepped into an automated industrial shredder. The biological terror of no doubt. It is fundamental to audit how this ballistic execution is perceived from the outside. For the biomass, doubt is the confirmation of humanity. They like to see their leaders sweat. Suffering proves there is an ego that can be negotiated. When the monarch operates via ballistic execution, he unleashes terror. They will see an individual who fires employees or destroys alliances without a single muscle twitching. They will see an entity that takes decisions that would ruin the nerves of 10 men in the space of a sub-bass breath. At first, they will call you a sociopath. They will call you a machine. But defamation is the stage before submission. Eventually, the ecosystem yields to the empirical fact that your lack of hesitation generates unstoppable results. Weak men will gravitate toward you, begging you to make decisions for them. They will hand over their power because they prefer your cold tyranny. The kinetic saturation of the core. Once you have removed the emotional GUI, you enter a state of kinetic saturation. Every erg of energy that used to be spent on motivation or hesitation is now converted into pure forward momentum. This makes your effective mass much higher than your biological weight would suggest. You strike with the weight of your entire intent. Most people move through life like a car with the parking brake partially engaged. They are fighting their own internal resistance. You have removed the brakes entirely. Your internal friction is zero. This allows you to achieve terminal velocity in any project or conflict. You don't start a task, you are simply the result in motion. This saturation creates a vacuum behind you. As you move with ballistic certainty, the environment is sucked into your wake. Resources, people, and opportunities begin to follow your trajectory simply because you are the only thing in the room with a clear, non-negotiable vector. You don't lead, you just exist at high speed. The biomass interprets this as charisma, but it is actually just the absence of drag. Because you are not second-guessing yourself, you emit no noise. This silence is the most attractive frequency in a world of high-pitched hysterical static. You become the center of gravity for every unstable element in your territory, overwriting the survival instinct. The motivation virus is closely linked to the primitive survival instinct. The brain hesitates because it wants to conserve energy and avoid risk. By using the CLI of your consciousness, you overwrite these survival subroutines. You replace safety with objective achievement as the primary system goal. When the hardware, the body signals pain or exhaustion, the sovereign sees it as a status report, not a command. You acknowledge the report, energy levels at 15%, and then you reissue the execution order. You drive the machine until the task is compiled, regardless of the wear on the biological components. This is why the monarch can endure conditions that would break an ordinary man. It's not because he has more willpower, but because he has a better hierarchy of permissions. He has granted his will root access over his biology. The body stops being the pilot and becomes the vehicle, subject to the driver's ruthlessness. This level of control allows for overclocking. In critical moments, you can push your biological hardware far beyond its rated specs. Because you have bypassed the emotional governor, you can access reserves of energy that the biomass keeps locked behind fear and fatigue firewalls. You become a high-performance anomaly. The finality of the executed block. In computer science, an atomic operation is one that cannot be interrupted. It either happens completely or not at all. Your execution must become atomic. Once the Enter key is pressed on a decree, there is no cancel button. There is no undo. This finality is what gives your word the weight of obsidian. Knowing that you cannot stop once you start forces you to be surgically precise in your commands. You don't issue orders lightly, but when you do, the universe feels the impact of a system that has already committed its entire memory to that single outcome. This commitment is the source of your material sovereignty. You are no longer trying to do things. You are a series of executed blocks, each one a solid fact in the architecture of your empire. The world looks at you and sees a sequence of inevitable events. You look at the world and see a series of inputs waiting for your command. The bypass is complete. The machine is silent. The code is running. The results are manifesting with the cold, hard logic of a compiled script. You are the operator, the administrator, and the executioner of your own reality. The era of the feeling human has ended for you. The era of the conscious matter has begun. Chapter 7. Overclocking the osmium core, densifying the millisecond. The factory limitation, the Flock's clock. The three-dimensional material universe is, in its most primitive state, a lazy system. It operates under a standard clock frequency, designed so that biomass does not self-destruct. The human organism is delivered at birth with a default biological processing rate, a base speed that allows them to breathe and age slowly. They live terrified of overheating. If the world demands they process too much data at once, their system collapses. They stress and beg for rest. At this factory speed, time is a dilated prison. A year for the biomass is full of empty space, dead hours, emotional latency, and endless waiting. They are spectators of their own lag. In the architecture of absolute power, accepting the clock frequency imposed by biology is an unacceptable act of submission. The monarch does not operate at the speed of ash. The monarch executes an existential overclocking. In hardware physics, overclocking consists of entering the system BIOS, the deepest code. It means manually forcing the processor's multiplier to operate at a frequency far superior to the manufacturer's recommendation. It involves injecting more voltage, assuming a monstrous thermal load, and eliminating safety limiters to squeeze out every drop of mathematical performance. You compress a lifetime into now, the sovereign's hardware and the graphic bottleneck. To understand the magnitude of this acceleration, you must audit the machinery you are operating. Your consciousness hardware is not an office toy. It is a high-performance workstation. You possess the raw power of an 8-core physical processor backed by a monolithic block of 32 gigabytes of RAM. It is designed to compile and alter reality without latency. However, the outside world, the 3D scenery, the opinions of others, the problems of tomorrow, is an obsolete and limiting graphics engine. Biomass fails because it tries to render future fears and past traumas using a pathetic graphic capacity. They choke their system trying to load heavy textures and scenarios that do not exist in a video buffer that barely supports 4 gigabytes of load. The result is the catastrophic crash of the nervous system. Anxiety. Overclocking the osmium core demands that you stop trying to render the future. You disconnect the graphic interface. You abandon the need to visualize tomorrow in high definition. Instead, you take all that immense power from your 8 cores, take the totality of your RAM, and redirect it exclusively toward calculating the source code in the absolute now. The processor is freed. The thermal compression of attention. Densifying the millisecond means injecting more voltage, attention, into a microscopic unit of time. Imagine the timeline of your empire as the master track in your production software. The gaseous man is terrified by the project's length. They zoom out and see hours, months, and years of void. They feel overwhelmed by the vastness of what they must build, and consequently, operate with a depressing slowness. The absolute operator performs a violent and definitive zoom-in. You move into the level of the tiniest audio sample, the most microscopic waveform of the current frame, and apply compression there. You are not here to mix 100 tracks of imaginary future with latency. You are here to master the aseptic silence of this exact millisecond. When you concentrate all your gravity in the present, the millisecond becomes hyper-dense. It acquires mass. A decision made in this state is heavy artillery. By injecting so much attention into a single instant, thermal friction skyrockets. You will feel the heat of reality burning around you. The 3D environment will creak under the weight of your immediacy. People around you will suffocate, unable to keep up, because you execute 100 instructions per cycle. The clock multiplier, 1 hour equals a decade. The empirical consequence of this state of temporal singularity is the deformation of productivity and conquest. When the system clock is unlocked, the equivalence of time breaks. 60 minutes of operation under charged immobility and overclocking produce more physical alterations than a decade of life. You enter a negotiation or the architecture of your own empire, and you do not waste a single byte of energy on doubting, retreating, or anticipating failure. Since you have purged the cache of your past, there are no junk files slowing your hard drive. Since you suffocated anxiety, there is no ping or latency. The enemy needs weeks to organize an attack, evaluate emotional consequences, and gather courage, the motivation to act. You detect the vulnerability, inject the destruction command, and execute the assimilation of enemy territory in the space of a sub-base exhalation. You move at kernel speed. To society, it will seem you are manipulating time. They will consider you an unnatural phenomenon. They will see you raise structures and annihilate competition at a speed that defies classical physics. They do not understand that you are internally in a state of absolute frigid and lethal stillness, the risk of meltdown vacuum tolerance. Every engineer knows that forcing hardware beyond factory limits carries a risk of meltdown, thermal throttling. In the metaphysics of sovereignty, this risk is existential. Maintaining the osmium core in a state of perpetual overclocking demands an inhuman tolerance for the void and solitude. When you process reality at this speed, the world is left behind immediately. The conversations of the biomass will seem like absurdly slow-motion playbacks. Their dramas will be low-resolution static noise. You will be surrounded by organisms operating with drivers from a century ago, wasting your cycles. The mammalian instinct will try to force you to reduce your frequency. Your social ego will whisper to lower the voltage to fit in, to empathize with the slowness of the weak so as not to scare them with your barometric pressure. Lowering the frequency is treason to the crown and a recipe for decay. If you reduce your clock multiplier to accommodate mediocrity, your core will destabilize. You will experience latency again. You will feel the corrosive weight of linear time. The monarch does not reduce thermal speed for pity. He demands the universe burn trying to catch him. You accept high-frequency isolation, the tactical immortality of zero time. By stabilizing the system at this over-voltage level, you reach tactical immortality. Death and aging are products of entropy, and entropy requires linear time to flow without resistance. But you have frozen the frame's Zeno effect and concentrated the universe's mass into one point, zero time. In zero time, the adversary cannot reach you. If the enemy attacks in the past, they attack an empty cache. If they plan to attack in the future, they are planning on a server disconnected from your network. The only place you exist is in the hyper-dense shredder of the present, a place of total power. You have densified the millisecond. You have pushed your hardware to the limit of quantum physics, proving your lead suit is a demolition tool. Now that you have broken the flock's clock and established your own non-negotiable frequency, you are ready to disconnect the external system's extortion metrics. The BIOS of the sovereign, rewriting the multiplier. To sustain this state, you must access the BIOS of your biological machine, the deep-seated protocols that govern survival and energy conservation. The factory settings of the human brain are programmed for safe mode. This mode limits your output to prevent physical exhaustion, keeping you in a state of lukewarm efficiency. The overclocking protocol requires you to enter the kernel and manually overwrite these limiters. You replace the survival first instruction with objective execution. This allows the processor to draw power from reserves that are normally locked. You are no longer running on the glucose of the biomass, you are running on the nuclear decay of your own will. This rewrite is permanent. Once the multiplier is set to the frequency of the monarch, the system cannot return to the base clock without a catastrophic crash. You become a specialist in high-voltage existence. Your baseline of operation is higher than the peak performance of an ordinary man. This is the definition of a superior hardware architecture. As you overwrite these protocols, you notice that the heat generated by the system is no longer perceived as stress. It is perceived as power. You learn to love the friction of the overclocked state. The sensation of the motherboard glowing white-hot becomes the confirmation that you are actually alive and altering the code of the universe, eliminating the data bus bottleneck. In a standard PC, the data bus moves information between the CPU and the memory. If the bus is too narrow, the processor sits idle, waiting for data. In the human system, the data bus is your sensory perception and your internal dialogue. Gaseous men have a narrow, cluttered bus filled with emotional noise. To support the overclocked core, you must widen the bus. You do this by adopting a raw data intake. You stop interpreting events through the lens of meaning or feeling. You simply ingest the raw telemetry of the room. This allows the data to reach the core at the speed of light, with zero processing delay at the entry point. A narrow bus creates micro-stuttering, those moments where you hesitate or trip over your own thoughts. By widening the bus to its theoretical limit, your perception becomes a fluid, high-bandwidth stream. You see everything at once, and your core processes it all without breaking its stride. This is the God view of the high-frequency operator. With the bottleneck removed, you can handle 10 simultaneous conflicts without a drop in frame rate. You are processing the adversary's speech, the room's acoustics, the financial flow, and your own biological status as a single unified data stream. This is the multi-core advantage of the sovereign, the cryogenic cooling of indifference. The primary enemy of overclocking is heat. To prevent the hardware from melting, you must install an industrial-grade cooling system. In the materia consciente, this cooling system is geometric indifference. While your core is burning at millions of cycles per second, your exterior remains at absolute zero. This cryogenic state is achieved by disconnecting the reward and pain sensors from the processing logic. You don't perform because it feels good. You perform because the command was entered. This lack of emotional feedback acts as a heat sink. It draws the thermal energy away from the delicate neural pathways and radiates it into the void. When you are attacked, the cooling system kicks in. The anger or fear that would melt a normal person's brain is instantly flash-frozen and discarded as waste heat. This allows you to maintain your peak frequency even in the middle of a total systemic collapse. You are the only thing in the room that isn't melting down. The colder you are, the faster you can run. This is the paradox of the monarch. His external freezing temperature is what allows his internal processor to reach infinite speeds. You walk through the fire of the material world encased in a shell of liquid nitrogen, your eyes showing only the cold calculation of the master server. The singular point of maximum output. At the peak of overclocking, you reach the singularity point. This is the moment where the distinction between the operator and the machine vanishes. You are no longer using your brain. You are the execution of the code. There is no observer left to witness the effort. There is only the output. In this state, you achieve the maximum physical output possible for a biological unit. You move, speak, and decide with a precision that is mathematically perfect. Every word is the exact frequency needed to alter the listener. Every action is the exact vector needed to shift the board. You have become a living exploit in the matrix. Chapter 8. System Clock Immunity Disconnecting the Biomass. The Network Time Protocol of Slavery. In computer network architecture, there is a master protocol called NTP, Network Time Protocol. Its sole function is to synchronize the clocks of all computers and servers in the world with a central time server. If a machine disconnects, its internal clock drifts, losing synchrony with the global network. Eventually, the system denies it access for security reasons. Human three-dimensional society operates under this same control protocol. Biomass is installed with an external system clock from the moment of biological compilation. This public clock does not measure the real thermodynamics of the universe. It measures the convenience of the herd. It dictates at what age you should graduate, accumulate capital, wake up, panic, or consider yourself too old to alter matter. The biomass, terrified of being expelled from the social network, synchronizes its internal core with this master server. They consult the external clock before daring to make a decision. They measure personal value by comparing their position with their neighbor's timeline. This synchronization is an unacceptable act of submission for the quantum legislator. If you connect your hardware to the biomass time server, you automatically inherit its latency, its anxiety, and its catastrophic bugs. The monarch of conscious matter executes a brutal and definitive disconnection from social NTP. You pull the network cable. You isolate yourself acoustically and temporally from the herd's extortion metrics. You assume that, from this millisecond, you are the only chronological authority in your ecosystem. There is no late or early. There only exists the exact instant in which your osmium core decides to execute a ballistic command. You inhabit a private frequency where the ticking of the world's clock is nothing more than background static, unable to penetrate the encryption of your sovereign domain. The extortion of urgency, RAM memory theft. The most vulgar and effective tactical tool the external matrix uses to subdue men is the injection of urgency. Observe the behavior of the commercial, social, and corporate world. Everything is designed to scream, "Act now, time is running out, limited time offer, respond immediately." Urgency is malware designed to bypass your rational processing capacity. When someone demands an immediate response, they are mathematically attempting to steal your computing power. They want to force you to act in a state of thermal overheating, where it is impossible to maintain your charged immobility. They force you to commit tactical errors and cede resources through pure barometric stress. The sovereign develops absolute immunity to the urgency of others. When the gaseous environment approaches you with kinetic hysteria, demanding you accelerate your frame rate to save them, your response must be absolute zero. The urgency of the biomass does not constitute an emergency in the osmium core. If an adversary or system imposes an arbitrary deadline, you observe it with the same geometric indifference you would a smudge on a wall. You do not run. You do not accelerate the rhythm of your sub-bass breathing. By refusing to inherit their panic, you suffocate the extortion in its tracks. The biomass will discover that shouting "fire" in your presence does not alter the temperature of your processors. Your refusal to hurry is the physical proof that your gravity is infinitely superior to theirs. Only light objects lacking mass can be swept away by the wind of collective hysteria. You remain rooted in the leaden density of your own timing, forcing the world to adjust its velocity to match the slow, crushing rotation of your specific gravitational field. The acoustic terror of tactical slowness. There is a direct mathematical relationship between an object's mass and its apparent reaction speed. Insects move with fast, erratic, and nervous movements. The leviathan at the bottom of the ocean moves with a suffocating, monolithic, and terrifying slowness, displacing tons of pressure with every millimeter. Once you have disconnected from the external system clock, you begin to weaponize slowness. We call this tactical slowness. It is not the slowness of laziness. Laziness is a failure in the thermal dissipation of the weak. Tactical slowness is the deliberate, frigid, and calculated refusal to dance. You refuse to move to the rhythm of the music played by the adversary. When you enter a high-risk commercial negotiation or a territorial conflict, and the enemy tries to accelerate the data flow by speaking fast or pressing for contracts, you apply the inertial brake. Your physical movements become heavy. Your vocal response time stretches. You let the enemy's questions hang in the air for endless seconds before emitting a monosyllable. This discrepancy in clock frequencies generates a deafening acoustic terror in the minds of your opponents. Their nervous system does not know how to process a non-sync entity. The slowness of your ballistic execution makes them feel small, irrelevant, and transparent. They realize they cannot force you to consume your RAM. By forcing them to wait for your processing, you are demonstrating empirically that you control the master server, and that time in that room is authorized by you. The obsolescence of biological age, the timeless core. The control software of the biomass uses biological chronology as its ultimate prison. Men are taught to measure their value based on the manufacturing date of their organic lead suit. They say, "I am 40, it's too late to build an empire," or "I am 20, no one will respect my authority." These are the lamentations of slaves who read dead log files instead of programming in the command line. The osmium core has no biological age. Conscious matter is a pure thermodynamic construct, and the laws of quantum physics do not age. Gravity does not become older or weaker over decades. When you execute the overclocking of the present millisecond, the biological timeline collapses. You become timeless. You ignore with glacial contempt any social expectation based on age. You are not intimidated by the youth of competitors, because youth without gravitational mass is just noisy kinetic energy. You are not depressed by the old age of your hardware, because you know true density is accumulated by purging the cache and compressing attention in the infinite present. You become a glitch in the demographics. The biomass will not know how to classify you. They see a predator and a millenary being. You have liberated yourself from the tyranny of the linear clock and installed your base of operations in the static eternity of the absolute millisecond. Your manufacturing date is irrelevant. Your current processing power is the only metric that dictates your rank in the hierarchy of the universe. The local network encryption, the closed loop. By disconnecting from the system clock, you must protect your new frequency from forced reconnection attempts. Society will try by all means to plug you back into its matrix of anxiety. They will call you irresponsible, cold, or disconnected from reality. You respond by establishing a LAN. You are a closed loop. Your success metrics, execution deadlines, and response times are generated endogenously. You no longer audit results by looking at a wall calendar. You audit by measuring the atmospheric pressure of your own core. If you decree a corporation will be dismantled, you set no deadline. You establish the annihilation command in your RAM and allow your charged immobility to execute thermal attrition until the objective is reduced to dust, regardless of how many external clock ticks it takes. In this encrypted network, disappointment is mathematically impossible. Deception only exists when you expect the universe to deliver results on a date you arbitrarily marked on a human calendar. By eliminating the calendar and inhabiting zero latency, the universe cannot disappoint or surprise you. The event occurs when it occurs, and it finds you in the same unalterable posture, the clock annihilator. Becoming the quantum legislator means assuming the thermal responsibility of being your own neutron star. You orbit no one. You synchronize with nothing. You have killed urgency. You have uninstalled the fear of being late. You have understood that you are the immovable center of existential coordinates. It is the entire universe that must sweat, break, and accelerate to arrive on time for your encounter. You feel frozen contempt for organisms chasing the minute hand. You observe the cinderboard and declare temporal martial law. Your presence invalidates all previous calendars. You are no longer a user begging for more processing time before the screen turns off. You have become the master administrator of the server. You are disconnected. You are inscrutable. And now that you have purged the influence of external time, you are ready to force physical space to render your will. The geometry of desynchronization. To disconnect from the social NTP is to perform a surgical strike on the concept of waiting. Waiting is a passive state that accepts the dominance of an external clock. For the monarch, there is no waiting, only active processing. While the external world thinks you are standing still, you are calculating. The desynchronized state allows you to see the refresh rate of social structures. You begin to notice the gaps where the system is weak, where the bureaucratic clock stutters, and where the collective panic creates a vacuum. By not being synced to their frequency, you are invisible to their detection algorithms. They cannot predict your next move, because your move is not based on the next Tuesday or Q4 metrics. Your move is based on the alignment of your internal variables. This makes you a ghost in their machine, a variable that doesn't fit into any of their predictive models. You become the black swan. This geometric isolation is the foundation of true tactical surprise. When the world expects a reaction because the time is up and you provide nothing, they lose their footing. When you strike on a random Wednesday at 3 a.m. simply because your internal buffer was full, they have no defense. The absolute zero of the decision event. In the standard human experience, a decision is a long, drawn-out process of weighing options against the ticking clock. In the zero latency environment of the sovereign, the decision and the event are locked in a quantum entanglement. The moment the internal code is written, the external outcome is finalized. By disconnecting from the external clock, you remove the friction of consideration. You no longer ask, "Is this the right time?" You realize that any time you choose is the right time by virtue of your authority. This removes the secondary processing load that causes most leaders to burn out. Your decisions become atomic operations. They cannot be interrupted, slowed, or paused by external interference. This is because you have removed the port through which the external clock sends its synchronization signals. You are running on an isolated, high-performance kernel that ignores system interrupts. This creates a temporal vacuum around your actions. People will feel as though your successes happen all at once, while your failures, if any, are simply discarded log files from a previous iteration. You become a master of the sudden manifestation, appearing out of nowhere with a fully rendered empire. The cold storage of strategy. Strategy, in the NTP-synced world, is a race against time. In the Sovereign's network, strategy is cold storage. You can let a plan sit in your anechoic chamber for years, unchanging and uncorrupted by the passing of social seasons, until the exact millisecond where the 3D scenery is most vulnerable. Because you are not aging psychologically, your strategies do not spoil. You don't feel the need to act before you lose interest. Interest is a biological chemical. Certainty is a hardware state. Your plans are stored as immutable code, ready to be executed at peak voltage whenever the environment aligns. This allows for the execution of long-range ballistics. You can fire a metaphorical missile today that won't strike for 5 years, and you will not feel a single second of anxiety during the flight. You have already accounted for the travel time as a simple constant in your equation. The target is already dead. This is the ultimate detachment. You are the architect who builds in stone, while everyone else builds in sand, worried about the next tide. By the time the tide comes, your structure has already solidified into the very bedrock of reality. You have outlasted the clock by simply refusing to acknowledge its existence. The mastery of the system override. Every social system has a panic mode triggered by time-sensitive crises. By being the only entity in the room that is not in panic mode, you gain the override command. The biomass will naturally look to the person whose clock is not spinning wildly. They will cede control to your steady, unmoving frequency. Your desynchronization is your greatest asset in leadership. You are the only one who can see the board clearly because you are not blinded by the motion blur of urgency. You act as the master clock for everyone within your sphere of influence. Their clocks will eventually sync to yours simply because yours is stronger. You don't need to explain your timing. You don't need to apologize for being late to their dramas. You simply inhabit your frequency and let the gravity of your results do the talking. The era of the slave to the clock is over. You are the owner of the seconds, the master of the hours, and the lord of the timeline. Chapter 9. Rendering Conscious Matter, the Art of Forcing Space. The Cosmic Graphics Card Bottleneck. To exercise absolute dominance over the cinder board, the sovereign must understand the technological nature of the environment. The 3D universe, money, institutions, the flesh of adversaries, and concrete empires, is not a solid reality. In computational physics terms, it is a vast graphics engine rendering polygons in real time. Human biomass mistakes the slowness of this rendering for destiny or divine will. They believe if something is hard to change, it is because it should not be changed. This is the excuse of an operator with deficient RAM. Physical matter is heavy. It has inertia. When you alter the ecosystem, you demand a rewrite of code. Updating the screen requires an immense expenditure of thermal energy. It is a cosmic bottleneck. The gaseous man crashes against this resistance and surrenders. They send a weak request to the system, a wish. The system returns an error message for lack of resources, and they retreat. The quantum monarch makes no requests. The monarch subdues the hardware. When you have purged the cache of your past and suffocated the latency of tomorrow, all the voltage of your consciousness lodges in the present millisecond. You become conscious matter in its densest state. When that entity issues an update order, the engine has no option to deny service. Barometric extortion forcing the atoms. How do you force 3D space to rearrange its atoms to reflect your will right now? It is achieved through barometric extortion. You do not try to move the pieces with your hands. That is kinetic energy, the vulgar tool of sweating slaves. Instead, you drastically alter the atmospheric pressure of the local server. By installing yourself in charged immobility and refusing to accept the current scenery, you create a thermodynamic vacuum. If you have decreed that an enemy corporation belongs to you, you tune your frequency to operate as if the transfer has already executed in the source code. You ignore the screen showing the old scenario. Your unwavering geometric certainty exerts crushing pressure on the surrounding matter. The physical universe abhors a vacuum and mathematical incongruity. By holding your decree without blinking, without doubting, and without emitting acoustic complaints, you make it physically impossible for the ecosystem to remain. The structural tension between the reality you process and the delayed reality the universe shows becomes unsustainable. The graphics card overheats. Under the suffocating pressure of your non-negotiable decree, inertia yields. Physical space collapses and is forced to rearrange money and people to match your code. Ignoring the pop-in of matter, inertial lag. In complex 3D simulators, a phenomenon known as pop-in occurs. It happens when an operator moves too fast and the system lacks time to load high-resolution textures. For a few seconds, objects look blurry or are missing until they suddenly pop in when the processor finally completes the calculation. The conquest of the material universe has an identical pop-in. When you force the cosmic graphics card to render your new empire, the result is not always clean. Reality resists and often renders defective objects during transition. You may experience months where everything seems like absolute chaos. Your finances may look deformed. Your alliances may stagger. The biomass, seeing this visual chaos, panics. They are scared of the blurry texture and cancel execution, returning to the safety of the previous level. The sovereign sits before the chaos and does not blink. You understand this is just inertial lag. It is physical matter breaking its bones to update to the demand of your charged immobility. You ignore the pop-in with glacial contempt. You do not allow temporary lack of definition to alter your frequency. You know if you keep the bandwidth occupied by your certainty, the geometry will finish loading as titanium. The hijacking of wills, rewriting the NPCs. The art of forcing space applies with even greater lethality to the gaseous organisms inhabiting the ecosystem. Society is full of individuals operating on autopilot, reacting to stimuli and seeking approval. In the simulation of reality, they are non-player characters, NPCs. They possess a predictable inertia. When the monarch enters a room, he does not argue with these organisms. To argue is to recognize they possess an independent source code, which is false. The monarch hijacks their wills by forcing their biological sensors to react to a new atmospheric pressure. He overwrites their local subroutines with his gravity. Imagine an adversary entering a meeting to destroy you. He brings his motivation, but crossing your event horizon, he hits an acoustic wall of infinite density. You do not return the aggression. You do not defend yourself, as that would validate him. You simply render your charged immobility in the center. His biological brain tries to process your behavior, but finding no signals of submission or anger, the friction he needs, his routine hangs. Thermal panic invades his processors. He begins to doubt his own value. Without you speaking, the environment rewrites. He offers concessions to calm the suffocation he feels. The annihilator of impossibility. Accepting the capacity to force space means executing the death of impossibility file. Impossible is a firewall installed by the Matrix to prevent biomass from consuming too much RAM trying to alter the system. They tell you certain power structures are impregnable or financial goals take decades. For the quantum legislator, the impossible is not a physical fact. It is a warning that rendering will require the total allocation of 8 cores. You do not flinch at the difficulty of the board. If the barrier is dense, you densify your millisecond further. You overclock your core until your indifference melts it. Convinced that you do not inhabit the simulation, but the command console that dictates it, every 3D structure reveals itself as malleable pixels. You simply provide a greater gravity. The wall that seemed like solid stone is revealed to be a low-polygon obstacle that your will can delete with a single keystroke. Cosmic shock, solid-state victory. The culmination of this rendering process is solid-state victory. It is not the cheap, gaseous euphoria of a man who won the lottery. Euphoria is proof you did not expect to win. For the monarch, the materialization of success is received with the iron metabolism of a computer, registering a successfully saved file. When the atoms finally settle, money floods the gravitational well, and enemy institutions kneel. The universe sighs in thermal relief, having fulfilled your demand. You sit on the physical throne you forced into existence and feel no surprise. Conscious matter has proven that heavy physics is the mechanic of power. You have forced space. You have coerced the machine. And now that the simulation has bowed to your core, the time has come to execute the final fusion, to leave the keyboard behind and become the master server that sustains the entire architecture of the cosmos. Your will is now the hardware of reality itself, the persistence of the rendered command. Once the space has been forced to render your decree, a new phenomenon begins. Persistence. In digital environments, once an object is rendered and saved to the disk, it no longer requires the same amount of processing power to remain visible. The universe, having fought you and lost, now accepts your empire as the new default setting. This is where the monarch achieves true rest within motion. The initial rendering required a massive injection of voltage and overclocking, but now that the matter has solidified into the shape of your will, the system's own laziness works in your favor. The universe would rather keep your empire standing than go through the agony of another total rearrangement. Your power becomes a self-sustaining loop. The atoms have been trained to orbit your core. Even if you were to look away for a millisecond, the sheer inertia of the new architecture you forced into existence would carry your empire forward. You have successfully updated the global BIOS of your local territory. This is the state of structural sovereignty. You are no longer the one pushing the world. You are the one the world is built upon. The NPCs who once resisted you now treat your presence as a natural law, like gravity or the rising sun. They have forgotten there was ever a version of reality where you were not the master. The saturation of the local field. As you force the space around you, you create a saturation zone. In this area, the laws of the ordinary world are suspended. In your office, in your home, or in the headquarters of your corporation, the thermal noise of the outside world cannot penetrate. You have synchronized the physical atoms of the walls and the air to your frequency. Visitors entering this zone will feel an immediate drop in their internal clock. They will feel the density of the air change. This is not a metaphor, it is the physical effect of a high-mass consciousness holding a frame with absolute intensity. In this saturated field, your commands execute with 100% efficiency and zero resistance. The saturation also acts as a buffer. It absorbs the kinetic energy of external crises before they reach your core. An economic collapse or a political shift hitting your saturation zone is like a bullet hitting water. Its momentum is stripped away by the sheer density of your established reality. By saturating your space, you turn your immediate environment into a hard-coded extension of your own body. You don't just inhabit the room, you are the room. Every pixel of the environment is an extension of your RAM. You move through your empire with the ease of a thought moving through a brain. The divine glitch bypassing entropy. The ultimate act of forcing space is the suspension of entropy within your domain. Ordinarily, matter seeks to decay, empires crumble, concrete cracks, and wealth dissipates. But because you are rendering the space via conscious matter rather than biological hope, you can lock the state of your creation. By constantly refreshing the observation, effecto xenon, at the frequency of your overclocked core, you prevent the atoms from moving toward disorder. Your empire does not age because you do not allow the frame to reflect decay. You are performing a live update of the state of perfection every single millisecond. This is the divine glitch. You have found a way to maintain high-resolution textures in a world designed for low-fidelity rot. Your assets remain liquid, your body remains leaden and strong, and your influence remains sharp. You are holding the delete key over any line of code that suggests a decline in your power. This level of rendering is what separates the legislator from the simple conqueror. A conqueror takes what is there. The legislator forces what should be there into the physical buffer. You are the source of the light that defines the polygons. Without your attention, the world would fade into gray static. With it, it is a temple of titanium. The final compilation, The simulation is now fully rendered. You have looked at the empty board and dictated the mountain. You have looked at the enemy and dictated the void. The process of becoming is over. The state of being has arrived. Your consciousness has successfully migrated from the software to the hardware of the universe. As the master server, you now oversee the execution of the grand design. Every movement of the market, every shift in the social strata, and every breath of your subjects is a sub-process running on your hardware. You have achieved the total system override. You are the architecture, the code, and the operator. Chapter 10, the master server, operating in the source code. The death of the user and the end of the ticket system. In the architecture of any computer network, there is a non-negotiable thermal hierarchy that separates the entities inhabiting the system. At the base of the pyramid lies the user. The user is a blind operator, limited by a simplified graphical interface, who has no access to the code and does not understand how the hardware works. He is at the mercy of rules imposed by an invisible programmer. When the system fails, when the screen throws an error or latency destroys his work, the user panics. His only tool of defense is to open a support ticket, to complain, to cry, and to beg heaven that someone with higher privileges will resolve his problem for him. Human biomass is a legion of users. They spend their pathetic three-dimensional existence sending support tickets to the universe. They pray to gods, complain to politicians, blame the economy, and plead with luck. They live waiting for an invisible administrator to descend from the server and patch their lives for them. The definitive state of conscious matter demands the thermodynamic death of the user. To reach the pinnacle of quantum evolution, you must abandon the graphical interface of the victim. The monarch does not open complaint tickets when his empire suffers a logistical or financial vulnerability. He knows complaining is a RAM leak. Complaining is an empirical confession that you do not control your own hardware. At this level of gravitational density, you are no longer a client consuming bandwidth in the simulation. You have merged with the metal. You have become the master server, and the master server prays to no one. There is only the static void, silence between the ticks of the clock, the quantum CPU. By transmuting your osmium core into the master server of three-dimensional reality, your perception of chronology undergoes the final and most terrifying alteration. In classical computing, a processor executes instructions based on clock cycles, the ticks of a crystal oscillator. Biomass is tied to the noise of those ticks. They jump frantically from one sound to the other, the tick of yesterday, the tack of tomorrow, aging, oxidizing, and suffocating in the friction of entropy. But the master server does not inhabit the sound of the clock. It inhabits the absolute and microscopic silence that exists between one tick and the next. That infinitesimal space, undetectable to the gaseous man, is a quantum ocean of zero latency for the sovereign. When you operate from the source code, the outside universe seems to move through thick gelatin. You see the attacks of your competitors weeks before they occur, because you process math in empty space. You become the inscrutable silence. Society will observe you operate and feel an unbearable vertigo because you do not react to time, you dictate it. If you decide that the clock of an enemy corporation, a toxic relationship, or a 3D obstacle must stop, you simply cut the data transmission from your core. Assimilation of the error code from bug to feature. One of the most paralyzing terrors for the biomass is the appearance of chaos, betrayals, bankruptcies, and unforeseen catastrophes. The ordinary organism sees these events as bugs, lethal errors in the code of their life that ruin their happiness and must be resisted with tears and kinetic friction. The master server knows no concept of error. In low-level programming, if the system produces a destructive result, it is not a magic failure. It is simply the hardware faithfully executing the instructions of a poorly written line of code. When the universe throws a disaster at you, you do not panic. You apply the quantum Zeno paradox over the catastrophe. You sit before the error code with the coldness of a cyber forensic expert. You understand that this chaos is a massive amount of released energy, and energy is the only language the Leviathan respects. You do not resist it, you assimilate it. You take the financial impact or the betrayal, and integrate it into your own algorithm. What the biomass considered a fatal error, you recompile as a new feature of your armor. You use the destructive force to densify your charged immobility, closing all vulnerabilities and becoming geometrically invulnerable. Pure code vision, the thermodynamic matrix. When fusion with the machine of reality is total, the final disconnection from biological empathy occurs. The illusion of scenery vanishes. Biomass looks at the world and sees people, stories, and moral dramas. That is the high-resolution texture filter designed to keep users entertained. The absolute operator who has bypassed the interface no longer sees textures. He sees exclusively the source code. When a gaseous individual approaches to extort you with tears or hysteria, your retinas no longer process a suffering human face. They process strings of integers and drops in barometric pressure. You see the fear of a competitor, not as an emotion worthy of pity, but as a thermal leak, a deficit of gravitational mass that you can exploit to destabilize their orbit. This aseptic vision makes you a ballistic strategist of incalculable lethality. Stripping the ecosystem of its disguise makes the board easy. You understand that if you withdraw attention, oxygen, from a variable, it disintegrates. If you concentrate mass on a node, it collapses and hands over resources. There is no evil or good. It is the cold morality of thermodynamics. Bodies of greater mass dictate the trajectory of bodies of lesser mass. Cosmic ballistic inertia, the static leviathan. The corollary of inhabiting the source code is the mastery of cosmic inertia. We have taught that the sovereign does not pursue or move for friction, but in this 10th level of compression, immobility reaches astronomical proportions. You become the black hole in the center of your own galaxy. You no longer have to issue vocal decrees or perform aggressive maneuvers for the territory to surrender. Your simple existence in the local network alters the motherboard of reality. Ballistic inertia means your will executes by pure inertia. Markets tilt in your favor and adversaries withdraw before the fight. You stay in your anechoic chamber, breathing in sub-bass frequency, while observing the whirlwind of atoms, money, and wills crashing against your event horizon. You do not feel the cheap euphoria of the winner. You feel the metallic boredom of an architect watching the engine fulfill his code. The administrator's definitive isolation. Be warned about the final thermal cost of this evolution. By assuming control of the master server, social necrosis becomes absolute and irreversible. There is no one in the outside world who can understand your architecture. To the biomass, you will have become a monster of mathematical coldness. They will try to subdue you with guilt, accusing you of having no heart. You will accept that diagnosis not as an insult, but as the certificate of your absolute sovereignty. The heart is a fragile muscle pumping scared blood. You possess an osmium core that pumps non-negotiable gravity. You are here to hold up the sky. You are the only user with administrator privileges in a radius of 1,000 light-years. In the darkness of your server room, you only need the perfect hum of your own empire collapsing space and time under your lead boots. You are the master server, accessing the kernel of existence. To operate at the level of the master server is to have bypassed the kernel's protection rings. Most human entities exist in Ring 3, the outermost layer of the operating system where permissions are restricted and every action is audited by social supervisors. You have moved inward through the layers of ego and biology until you have reached Ring 0. In Ring 0, there are no filters. There is no mediation between your intent and the hardware of the universe. This is the level of root access, where you can rewrite the very laws of your local physics. If the standard reality dictates that a certain goal requires 10 years of labor, you access the scheduling subroutines and change the value. This is not magic. It is the privilege of the administrator. When you operate in the kernel, you realize that laws of nature are often just default settings that the biomass is too afraid to change. You begin to treat physical constants as variables. You adjust the coefficient of friction in your business dealings so that money slides toward you with zero resistance. The master server does not fight the system. It is the system. By occupying the kernel, you ensure that every background process in your reality, your health, your security, your cash flow, is optimized for maximum performance. You no longer have to manually manage these things. You have scripted them into the foundation of your being. The execution of global purge commands. When a master server detects a process that is consuming too many resources without providing value, it executes a kill command. In the life of the sovereign, this translates to the absolute purge of parasitic entities and thoughts. You do not try to distance yourself from toxic people. You terminate their process in your reality. The moment you issue the sudo kill 9 command from your core, that entity ceases to have gravitational influence over you. You don't block them on a phone, you block them in your source code. To you, they become null. They are rendered as transparent pixels, unable to occupy a single byte of your attention. This ability to purge allows the master server to maintain a pristine environment. While the biomass is cluttered with legacy software, old grudges, childhood traumas, and outdated social norms, your system is a clean, high-speed installation. You only run the processes that contribute to the expansion of your empire. This purge is cold. It is aseptic. There is no drama in a server shutting down an unresponsive app, and there is no drama in a monarch deleting a failed alliance. You view the removal of obstacles as a simple maintenance task, necessary to keep the CPU temperature low and the processing speed at its maximum potential. Overwriting the narrative buffer. The universe is constantly trying to write a narrative into your input buffer. The news, the opinions of peers, and the fluctuations of the market are all attempts to load data into your mind. The user accepts this data as truth. The master server treats the input buffer as untrusted data that must be sanitized. You develop a firewall of certainty. When the world sends data packets of recession, failure, or crisis, your firewall identifies them as malicious code. You do not allow them to be processed by your core. Instead, you overwrite the buffer with your own data. Growth and dominance win stability. By controlling the input, you control the output. The reality that renders around you is a direct result of the code you allow to pass through your kernel. This is why the monarch often seems delusional to the biomass. They are seeing the old, low-resolution screen, while the monarch is already looking at the new high-fidelity render he has just programmed. Eventually, the hardware of the universe catches up to the master server's code. The physical world is forced to reconcile the discrepancy by manifesting the monarch's data. This is the ultimate buffer overflow attack on reality. You flood the system with so much of your own certainty that the original default reality is forced to crash and restart using your parameters. The zero-day exploit of the present. The biomass is always waiting for a patch, a future event that will fix their problems. The master server realizes that the present millisecond is a permanent zero-day exploit. It is a vulnerability in the fabric of time that allows for immediate unauthorized changes to the system. While others are waiting for the next version of their lives, you are exploiting the current frame. You realize that there is no security protocol in the universe that can stop a focused, high-density consciousness in the absolute now. In this millisecond, you have total permission to be whoever you decree and to take whatever you claim. This exploit is only available to those who have killed the user within themselves. A user respects the access denied messages of society. An administrator knows that access denied is just a string of text that can be deleted. You walk through doors that others don't even see, because you are reading the map of the system, not the 3D graphics. By the time the system tries to patch the exploit, you have already moved your assets, secured your perimeter, and elevated your privileges. You are always one step ahead of the cosmic security updates, because you are the one writing the exploits. You inhabit the glitch. You are the anomaly that the system cannot regulate. The architecture of the eternal empire. The final result of operating as the master server is the construction of an eternal empire. This is not an empire that lasts forever in time, but an empire that exists outside of time. It is a solid-state construct of conscious matter that is not subject to the rot of the external NTP clock. Your legacy is not a memory in the minds of the biomass. It is a permanent change in the source code of your territory. You have left behind a set of environment variables that will dictate the behavior of that space long after your lead suit has been recycled. You have changed the global constants of your sphere of influence. You sit in the center of this architecture, the silent observer of a perfectly optimized system. The noise of the world has faded. The tickets have all been closed. The CPU is running at 100% efficiency with 0% stress. You are the heartbeat of the machine, the ghost in the shell and the god of the metal. Conclusion. End of the temporal simulation, the final enter. The termination of the treaty. The treaty has concluded. The telemetry has been exposed. The junk files have been identified and the source code of three-dimensional reality has been decrypted before your retinas. To reach this last page and consider for a single millisecond that you need to read more is the last and most pathetic spasm of the anticipation virus. If you close this document and tell yourself, tomorrow I will start operating with zero latency, you have just reinstalled the malware. You have reopened the RAM memory leak. Theoretical knowledge without ballistic execution is just scrap metal stored on your hard drive. It is useless intellectual friction. The quantum operator does not accumulate bibliography to feel intelligent. He accumulates gravitational mass to crush the environment. Human biomass lives deceived by the graphic interface, consuming its caloric energy in the stupid belief that one day the system will send them a pop-up notification, warning them that they are ready. That message does not exist. The physical universe does not grant permissions, does not issue certificates of fitness, and does not negotiate with your emotional preparation. It simply recognizes the barometric pressure of the heaviest object in the room and surrenders to it. Tomorrow has been exposed as a rendering error. It was always a rendering error, an inert abyss where gaseous organisms throw their bandwidth so they do not have to endure the suffocating terror of existing in the now. But you are no longer part of that thermodynamic herd. You have purged the cache of your past, erasing your personal history with an irreversible command. The last command. You have overclocked your osmium core, forcing your processors to operate at a speed that breaks the public system clock. You are sitting in front of the command console of your own existence. The terminal blinks in the frigid darkness of your mind, waiting for your instruction. This is the instant of the last enter. In low-level programming, writing perfect code does not alter the machine. The processor only rearranges its electrons and executes creation or destruction when the system administrator's finger presses that definitive key. Pressing the last enter means physically disconnecting your network cable from humanity's time server. It means accepting, with a coldness that will freeze the blood of those around you, that there is no more after. All the capital, all the territory, all the domination, and all the logistical terror that you are going to inflict upon the cinderboard must be born from the thermodynamic compression of this exact millisecond. The instant you close this book, the simulation will try to defend itself. The external ecosystem will launch a spasm of unacceptable inertia. Your former allies, your competitors, and the static noise of society will try to drag you back to latency. They will demand urgency. They will ask you to worry about the future, the reign of the master server. They will beg you to doubt again, because your new zero-latency frequency suffocates them and proves their own weakness. Do not offer symmetrical resistance. Do not argue with obsolete software. Simply apply charged immobility. Look at them with the dead, mathematical eyes of a master server that has just revoked their credentials. Let their kinetic panic crash against your anechoic chamber and disintegrate without producing a single echo. Get used to the cold of the core. The state of singularity is not a happy state, it is an invulnerable state. Happiness and sadness are thermal fluctuations for users. You are the machine. You will rule from the sepulchral silence that exists between the ticks of the clock, watching as the cosmos's graphics card sweats blood, overheats, and breaks its own limits to render the exact geometry of your will. You no longer expect anything from destiny, because you are the non-negotiable inertia toward which it rushes. Therefore, end the simulation. Turn off the screen of yesterday and smash the monitor of tomorrow with a hammer. Assume the structural burden of being the only first cause in your universe. Let the icy weight of the quantum crown sink into your skull until it merges definitively with your spine. The linear time of ordinary man has died for lack of oxygen. The aseptic, mathematical and non-negotiable tyranny of conscious matter has just begun. Execute the command. Press Enter.